I don't think I have to tell anybody that we have a major crisis going on in this country with opiate addiction. And that tells me that the real crisis is a crisis of pain. That's what opiate drugs are for, reducing pain. But why would we have so much physical pain now? Why would we have more physical pain in the country than ever before? I don't think we do. I think it's mental pain. So I'm going to have to talk a lot about mental pain and why that is an epidemic now and what we might be able to do about it. Now, if you're looking at the slide, you'll see that I've stuck a pun in the slide. It's a bilingual French-English pun involving of course, the French word for bread looks like pain. Now, some people find puns to be painful. People actually groan and so. This is a very mild form of mental pain. There are also very extreme forms of mental pain, and I have to illustrate that. I was reading a psychiatric journal, and these psychiatrists had interviewed people who had attempted suicide, and some of the quotes were really dramatic. One quote was this man said that he woke up in the middle of the night and had forgotten the furniture had been rearranged, and he tripped over his cocktail table and broke both his legs. And he said, yeah, that was painful, but it was nothing compared to the pain that led to my suicide attempt. Another quote was from somebody who currently had advanced bone cancer and said that was very painful, but he'd rather have that than the pain of depression that led him to have suicide thoughts. So mental pain can be very extreme. It can also be as mild as my puns. This is my pun quotidien. And so I'm going to talk mostly about mental pain that's somewhere in between. So when we first think of pain, if you say the word pain, everyone thinks immediately in terms of physical pain. And like an ideal example is a stubbed toe. It really feels like the pain is in your foot. But I'm going to try to convince you that the pain is really in your prefrontal cortex. And if the pain signals from your foot don't produce a certain pattern of activity in your prefrontal cortex, it's not going to be painful. Damage to the body does not necessarily cause what we say is pain, unless it causes this brain activity. And to see that there's two distinct components to pain, I'm going to show you examples where they could be separated. So the two distinct components are the physical sensation on the body, and then the emotional or affective or psychological or mental component of pain. And it's the mental component that makes you miserable. It's the mental component that's really unpleasant and that you want so much to avoid. The physical sensation by itself, if it doesn't cause the mental component, is not a big deal, and I can show you cases where that occurs. And so let's consider these exceptions where physical pain doesn't cause mental pain. So I have a very cute video, which there's a lady in Scotland who has a genetic abnormality or anomaly, which causes her to have a condition called congenital indifference to pain. It's not the same as congenital insensitivity to pain. She can feel the sensations that normally cause physical pain, but it doesn't bother her. And so let's hear her talk about giving birth while not being able to feel pain.
I kept thinking, as soon as I feel pain, I'll ask for it. And before I realised it, I'd had the children. So it wasn't a case of I'm a martyr, I don't feel pain. It was I'm prepared to take anything because they tell me it's going to be awful. I felt things. I felt my body stretching. I felt peculiar feelings, but nothing to make me, no pain. It just, felt like, a bit like someone stretching your mouth wide open. The normal reaction is you cut yourself or burn yourself once, maybe twice. Then you avoid that because your brain says, don't do that. Well, my brain doesn't say don't do that. And that's not good. That's not good at all, is it? I haven't got the normal sort of safeguards.
So there really is a downside to congenital indifference to pain. Some people have had this condition, have broken their ankle and kept walking on it, and actually, had serious deformities. So that's not the way you want to avoid pain. However, she also says later in this interview that she doesn't feel anxiety or depression either, and that's no surprise to me because it's not just that physical sensations don't cause pain. Nothing causes her mental pain. That's something we might want. There's another drastic way to get it, and that's through neurosurgery. In the bad old days, they gave prefrontal lobotomies for schizophrenia, depression, and also for chronic pain. Of course, as we know, this was a brutal operation that was often, the cure was worse than the original disease. But in recent years, they've actually created a very precise procedure. Columbia University Medical is now advertising its laser cingulotomy. And what it does is it interrupts the pain signals at this final stage when it leaves the cingulate cortex and is heading for the prefrontal cortex. And if you can interrupt it at that point, you can really get rid of what they say, you get rid of the bothersome aspect of pain. You still feel the physical sensations, but they sort of go into the background, they don't interfere with your life. It's definitely considered a last resort treatment for severe chronic pain. But the fact that it works supports what I'm saying about how it really is all mental pain, whether it's caused by a physical sensation or caused by some psychological situation. And then in more normal situations, this can happen with certain drugs. So I got to experience this myself. I was at the dentist and I agreed to have some nitrous oxide, which we call laughing gas. Some people use it for recreational purposes. And because it dissociates you from your mental pain. And so while I was breathing in the nitrous, I could feel the Novocaine needle piercing my flesh. And I could feel that it was a sharp sensation, but I didn't care. It didn't bother me because it felt like it was at a distance. It felt like I was observing it. Very strange. I didn't really want to have that again. I'd rather just have Novocaine, and actually I've used the propofol or something to go through an implant. Just sleep through the whole thing is even better. But anyway, also hypnosis can work in a similar way. Especially for people who are susceptible to it. So what is mental pain? Well, we often, it sounds like we're just using it as a metaphor when we say that someone is a pain in the neck, or this situation is a pain in the neck. And we also refer to maybe a joke as being painful, as I said before, or a boring talk, that's going to be a painful talk. But this is not a metaphor. If you're experiencing pain but there's no physical sensation, it's pain. It's all mental pain is what I'm saying. You have mental pain and you either have a physical sensation that's causing it, and then you relabel it as physical pain, recognize it as physical pain, or you don't, in which case you wind up attributing it to almost anything. We're in mental pain, but we often say that, oh, well, because we feel like we're worthless or something like that. It's just, we find all kinds of ways to imagine where our mental pain is coming from, and we're usually wrong, which is why we need psychotherapy, which I'll mention a little later. And so other experiments that show the connection between mental pain and physical pain is that a lot of what relieves physical pain also relieves mental pain. I mean, you can block physical pain at the periphery, by numbing the skin or something, but mostly we block pain centrally in terms of drugs that affect the brain. And they found in experiments that if you gave people acetaminophen, Tylenol, they would feel less pain of social rejection in a lab situation where they play a video game and it looks like they're being rejected, and some people actually feel some pain from being rejected in the game, but much less if they have the Tylenol. And they don't give out marijuana in the experiments, but people who were using marijuana regularly also were less affected, had less social pain. And we know that various drugs and pleasurable activities reduce both physical and mental pain. Now, what about our opiate addiction crisis? Well, when people take an opiate for some physical pain, some strong back pain or some other pain like that, they notice at some point that their mental pain has been reduced a great deal too. They feel kind of good about that. And then if they do wind up withdrawing from the opiate, and when withdrawal is completely over, there's still that deep memory of, hey, this stuff actually got rid of the mental pain, and now the mental pain is back. Even if the physical pain is gone, I may still have it. This stuff is going to help me with my mental pain. So you can easily wind up with a psychological addiction that brings you coming back to anything that relieves pain, which includes alcohol, marijuana. It's not a coincidence that these drugs either block pain or they increase pleasure, which is another way of distracting from and reducing pain. Basically, the more pleasure you have, the less pain you feel. So what causes mental pain? Well, in terms of relatively mild mental pain, this is a daily occurrence. That's why we call it a quotidian pain. Frustration, disappointment, annoyance. You dropped your phone, you broke your phone, you lost your phone. You just missed that train, you just missed your bus, you just got a bad review. There's all kinds of ways that we feel a little touch of, we broke something or we spilled something, we have to clean it up. We have to do some mental effort we didn't expect to do. We just worked hard on a task and then the boss said, we didn't really need you to write that code anyway. We found another way to go. Lots of sources for mental pain. And a point I want to also make is that when you don't have a distinct physical sensation, but you have a lot of diffuse bodily pain, which can come from being stressed out, it can feel like it's just mental pain, even though it has a bodily origin. So we usually have a mixture of that. So when you're feeling antsy, tense, I want to jump out of my skin, this is really a lot of diffuse physical pain. And often it's labeled as anxiety. Well, certainly pain causes anxiety as well as depression. There's like three major reactions we have to being in pain. We either feel like, it's inevitable and we get depressed, we give up, we feel helpless. Or we're scared by it, we're afraid, where is this going? I don't know where this is coming from and what's gonna happen, and you get anxious. Or you attribute it to something very specific and you get angry. You wanna know, well, what does pure mental pain feel like? Without mixing it with anything else. Well, just think of a time that you were really bored. You were stuck in traffic, you were stuck on a line. And usually at that time, not only do you not have distractions available, even if you might have distractions available, you might be too annoyed to use them. And so you're just kind of stuck there and you're feeling just uncomfortable. The question I have is, did the pain just start when you got stuck in the situation and you didn't have any distraction and the pain just begins? Or, my theory, is that you've been carrying around that pain all the time. You're carrying around chronic mental pain all through the day, but you've been distracting yourself successfully most of the time, either with tasks or work or, playing scenarios in your mind, various things that we do to distract ourselves. And when the distractions fall away, you just feel that pain that's there all the time. And so we always want to avoid it. We know it's lurking back there on the edge of our consciousness. And that's kind of what the singulotomy is supposed to do, is take your pain and move it to the background, which is much better than it being in the foreground. It's less bothersome that way. And so we can keep our mental pain in the background just naturally with various distractions. Definitely some people are more easily bored than others, and it could be because they have a higher chronic level of mental pain, or it could be because they're just not as good at distracting themselves, either one. And psychologists like to measure everything, so they measure boredom proneness. And obviously these questions are pretty clear, like the last one. Unless I'm doing something exciting, even dangerous, I feel half dead and dull. So that can explain why you get adrenaline junkies. Some people need really extreme sports and stuff to get rid of their mental pain. Now, the word neurosis is really not popular at all anymore. Psychiatrists don't like it because it's too general. They want very specific diagnoses. You have an anxiety disorder, you have major depression, you have obsessive compulsive disorder or something like that. However, psychologists are absolutely fine in measuring neuroticism as a personality trait. It's one of the big 5 personality traits, along with agreeableness and openness and conscientiousness. And so if you think in terms of the neuroticism scale, the N scale, then it's easy to think of people as being at different levels of neurosis. And so very few people are at near the zero end. So everyone has at least a little bit of neurosis. Only about 20% of the population is so high on the end scale that they could qualify for a clinical diagnosis. But the rest of us have what I call the common neurosis. And this is, well, it's what it says. It's just that common, that typical. And, the people that you think don't have much neurosis, those are the people you haven't gotten to know very well. You probably have noticed that the better you know someone, the more you know about their neuroses, the more neurotic they seem to be. So, that person who seems like they have it all together, they might be guru-like, or they are probably just hiding it very well. And now, the cute baby with a large head. And this leads to what I like to call the big head theory of chronic pain, with apologies to the Big Bang people. The biggest question is, all right, so why do so many of us have chronic mental pain? Where's that coming from? Is that just a human condition? Is that just natural? That's just being human. This is what you have to deal with. I don't think it's actually wired in. I think it's part of an evolutionary flaw, because the expansion of the human brain, which has a lot of advantages, caused expansion of the human head, which is hard to get out of the birth canal at some point, which is why it's good to have that congenital indifference to pain. If you're giving birth, that helps. But a lot of evolutionary biologists have said that it appears the human infant is born about like a year too soon. We really should be in the womb a lot longer because we have a lot of brain development left to do. And in fact, I think we know just how helpless the human infant is for a very long time. Can't get any of its needs met. And yet it has some consciousness. So it's conscious enough to be aware that it's in pain and not getting everything met, is like in the womb. In the womb, everything was kind of cool. And it's like suddenly you're thrown out and it's like you're not in the womb anymore. It would be better if humans had a pouch like a kangaroo, and then you could just, like the Native Americans used a papoose. People do swaddling. People carry around the baby, which is a very good idea. But it's going to be very hard for modern parents to give an infant the intensive care that they need for like a whole year at least. And so during this helpless period, the baby is going to start secreting stress hormones because the stress system is already developed. That's the irony here. You haven't developed any means to deal with stress or to get your needs met, but you've developed the ability to circulate stress hormones and be stressed out. And here's another evolutionary flaw. If you have stress hormones at a high level circulating for a relatively long period of time, that damages the neural mechanisms. It damages a number of neural mechanisms, and including ones that serve to give negative feedback and reduce the stress level. Mostly we have homeostasis, so whenever we have a high level of anything, there's some part of the brain that kicks in to reduce it back down. If that part gets damaged, you're stuck in chronic stress. And that can happen even before you're born. If mom is stressed, and there's been research on, for instance, mothers who've gone through an earthquake or something early in their pregnancy, and that baby is going to have problems later on. The problem is the stress hormones of the mom. Some of them actually can cross over the placental barrier and go into the baby's bloodstream and actually start damaging the baby's stress system before they're even born. So we know that some babies are born addicted because of the mother's taking drugs, but they can also be born with a bad stress system already. That occurs especially in poverty situations, other stressful environments. It can get especially bad. And we can see that babies and toddlers are in pain because they have no inhibition about expressing it. They just go right off the rails, And so when they're screaming and stuff, sometimes parents say, well, they just want attention. And that is true. It's painful if they don't get attention, and it's stressful, and it builds up stress. Attention is not just like, a luxury for an infant. It's vital. They're expecting to be held close. And of course, they're highly susceptible to boredom. That's why it's always great to bring your toddler to a restaurant or a movie theater or someplace where they're bound to be completely bored. Fortunately, modern electronics allows a lot more distractions to occur, so that helps. Ricky here thinks that he's still a kitten. He's 4 years old, he's an adult cat, but most mammal babies need lots of physical contact. I didn't stick him in that position. He's constantly pushing his wet nose on my neck and face. So we've developed this kind of mental pain in infancy, but then surely it just goes away later, right? We grow up and the pain just fades away. Well, unfortunately, that damage doesn't just heal by itself. It doesn't just go away. Not if you've already damaged neural mechanisms from prolonged stress. So what happens? Well, we just learn better and better ways to distract ourselves. And so my theory is that chronic mental pain is something that everybody is living with, but most of us are quite successful at keeping it in the background. Well, that determines our level of neuroticism. The ones who aren't very successful appear to be neurotic. The others are neurotic, but you don't see it. It's not obvious. Now, there's a lot of talk lately about how we're addicted to cell phones, and isn't this amazing? Surprising how quickly people are getting addicted to social media, to Candy Crush, to various games on their phone. It's no surprise at all if you have chronic mental pain and you find an easy way to distract yourself at any point so you don't have to feel the pain of boredom, you're going to do that. And we've been addicted much longer to something else, which is inner speech. So since the dawn of language, we've been talking to ourselves inside our heads. So a toddler will start with what's called, Vygotsky called private speech, which they'll just talk out loud to themselves. But then they learn a trick, which we've all learned, which is how to talk to yourself without making any sound or even moving your lips. And I know a lot of people do it because I did a survey, including one with Dr. Ruveni Vilhauer in the house. And we see that just how much people hear their own voice in their head incessantly throughout the day. So I think of this as the original human addiction. Now, I'm going to go through the rest of the slides quickly. I'm just going to talk about some different types of distractions. People have probably heard of the default mode network. This is a part of the brain that gets very active when you have nothing to do. They see it in an MRI scanner getting very active. But it's also the part of the brain that produces your soap opera. So we all walk around with our daily soap opera in our head. You know, it's a story of how we're doing, how everyone else is doing, what's going to happen, what happened in the past. And we're wired cognitively to work very hard to try to figure out the origin of our mental pain, which, you know, is a hopeless task because we've had it forever and we're not going to figure our way out of it, but we can't help trying. And so we wind up, well, some people wind up beating themselves up with their default mode network. I mean, you will find yourself mind wandering, and that's when the DMN is active. But for some people, if you're a little more neurotic, the whole default mode network can backfire because it's generating activity that includes negative memories and worries. And now you're just perpetuating the mental pain. And so this is another flaw in our situation. I like to use the analogy of scratching an itch. Sometimes if your skin is itchy and you scratch it, it takes care of it, there's no problem. But depending on what kind of skin condition you might have at the moment, scratching it can actually make it worse, or at least keep the itching going. And so in that case, you have to do the counterintuitive thing. If you want the itching to stop, you have to not scratch it. You have to just be with it. You have to allow the itch to be there without scratching it. We're not good at that. We want to avoid chronic mental pain all the time, and so our default mode network is scratching the itch and making things worse by, you know, running all kinds of doomsday scenarios in our head. Deliberate distractions can be very fun. Pleasure seeking is a large part of it. But the problem there is if your pleasure seeking is very effective, it's easy to get psychologically addicted to it. And It's only temporary, and you might need higher and higher levels. This happens with money all the time. You get a salary increase, and it feels good. And then pretty soon you come back to what's called a happiness set point, which I feel is actually your chronic mental pain set point. And so now you need more money and another raise. And it never ends. I hate to tell it to you, but there's no amount of money that you're going to get that's the chronic mental pain is just going to go away. Money buys distraction. It doesn't buy permanent happiness. And the worst case, pain that we can control is not as aversive or unpleasant as pain that we have no control over at all. And boredom is a case of pain that we really can't control directly other than distraction. And if people have very strong chronic mental pain, well, actually, sometimes they actually produce self-injury. And cutting is actually on the rise in young people. It's a disturbing trend. But it tells you it's an external symptom that shows you they're dealing with a lot of chronic mental pain. So much chronic internal mental pain that the pain that they're causing themselves, which is controllable, is not as bad and actually distracts them from the terrible pain inside. It also might also encourage endorphins, which lower pain. Now, in one study that got a lot of press 5 years ago, it was a boredom experiment, and people had an electrode. They can give themselves a shock. They actually were giving themselves shocks during the boredom period, a lot of them, and shocks at a level that they'd previously said they would pay to avoid. Best of these effortless distractions like flow, and this I'll talk about in our question and answer period, so I won't go into it now. But I do want to mention that paying attention to external sensations, if we're drawn by novelty, it's particularly pleasurable. People love to go sightseeing, looking at fireworks displays. Anything that draws your attention outward feels effortless and much less painful and is a wonderful distraction. And it can also be applied to internal body sensations, or at least surface sensations. So we love sunbathing, a massage. Paying attention to that is really very nice. In fact, a sauna, which is often so hot people might otherwise feel that it's unpleasant. Well, if you like it and you feel that it's healthy, it's actually a good thing. You feel good with it. So it's only painful if we struggle against it. So my prime example here is if you've just been exercising, you got a good workout, and you're really happy with the workout you got, or you did some manual labor that you're very proud of, and you wake up the next morning and you have aches and pains that you know are coming from that. Those aches and pains don't feel terrible. It's kind of a little pleasurable. It's like it reminds you of a job well done, of accomplishing some kind of goal. Now, if you had not done any kind of exercise or physical labor, and you wake up one morning with the same exact aches and pains, you're going to think you're coming down with the flu, and it's not going to feel pleasant at all. It's all about your attitude towards the sensations, whether you're willing to feel them because you're not threatened by them, because you feel it's a good sign, or you're afraid of them, or they represent something bad, and you want to struggle against them. And we really have an automatic system when the brain knows that sometimes we have no time to feel pain in an emergency situation or something like that. And when we're exercising, if we're running a lot, that could cause a certain amount of pain, but the body knows that this is not the time to feel pain. This is good stuff we're doing, so it secretes endorphins. These are, your own internal opiates, and it suppresses the pain. And we can trick people into secreting their endorphins with the placebo effect. Everyone is surprised at how effective placebos are, particularly against pain. And that's because while you cannot voluntarily get yourself to secrete endorphins to lower your pain, if you really believe that a treatment that you're getting is going to take away the pain so you don't have to struggle, you don't have to worry about it, you can just relax, it's going away, then you secrete the endorphins because the brain doesn't need to shield itself. It doesn't need to distract itself from the pain. So, demonstration time. Now we're near the end of the talk. But here's the demonstration I want to do. What I'd like everyone to do is do a little body scan. Just it'll be about 30 seconds, and start with the forehead and and just go down to the rest of the body. So close your eyes, get comfortable. And what we're looking for in this scan is we want to find the strongest sensation in your physical body. The most unpleasant sensation would be best. Any tension that you might be feeling somewhere. But, you know, if you're not feeling any strong or unpleasant sensation, just any sensation of sitting or what you're feeling. Okay, so now what I would like you to do is practice some mindfulness with this sensation that you identified. And so what I mean by that is now bask in it. You know, make believe that this is like this sensation is a good sensation that represents some healing. It's based on some treatment or something, and so it means something good. And so feel it and take it in and bask on it. Don't concentrate, focus on it, but just let it be there very innocently, very gently. We have a few seconds for that. So now don't open your eyes suddenly. Don't shock the body, but you can come back. This is something you should be doing daily. Something like this anyway. Some sort of mindfulness meditation where you totally accept the feelings and thoughts that are going by, non-judgmentally. And it's always good to have some sensation that you attend to, some object that you come back to, for instance, feeling your breath going in and out. And this is an ability that just increases with practice. It's not like you get very mindful instantly. People will say, well, I can't meditate because I have too many thoughts. That's like saying, I can't go to the gym and exercise because I'm too weak. Well, you start with something. You can do something, and then you get better. You practice, and it gets better. So, in summary, the 4 not-so-noble truths. We have these 3 evolutionary flaws that conspire against us. Being born too early, building up a lot of stress. The stress hormones itself damage the feedback mechanisms. We wind up in chronic stress. And then we're wired to use our brains to struggle, and it perpetuates the mental pain. And the solution is this total acceptance of negative feelings, which is a little bit of what you were getting a taste of there. So I want to give out a shout out to the Mindful Education Lab, where Joshua Aronson and I are trying to learn ways to get young people to meditate and get it in the school systems, get it as part of their regular part of their day. And so I have some readings for you. I guess I'll leave the readings up while I get Q&A time here.
So I hope you guys have some questions, but I know it's probably percolating as you're digesting the info. Whenever I talk to anybody about this, they get hung up on the word neurosis.
Yeah.
They and I know you went into neurosis being not the clinical version of it, but could you break it down a little bit more? Because I have a lot of folks say, I don't think this is for me. Like, I'm really chill. None of my friends, none of my coworkers say I'm neurotic. So when you say it, what do you mean?
I mean, obviously the word neurosis has a negative connotation, and the word neurotic is often used as a put down. And it's a way to criticize someone. Oh, you're being neurotic, you know. I'm not particularly concerned with neurotic behavior. That's very judgmental. But I'm much more concerned about neurotic feelings. So if you feel great all the time, fine. Then maybe you're very low in neuroticism. But if you're feeling little mental pain, little blasts of mental pain throughout the day, or if you're feeling bored too much at work, then you do have some level of neurosis, and it's fine to recognize that and to try to deal with it. People get defensive about it. People would like to think that neurosis is completely normal and natural. It's kind of a little comforting to think, well, we're all in the same boat. We all have this neurosis, so, you know, let's just accept it. And I think it's okay to be somewhat accepting of it. And you might be afraid to think, oh, maybe I could get rid of it completely, but then it raises your hopes, and your hopes can get dashed. I'd like to think, though, that that people can get better, and it's okay to look at different exercises and meditation things that can lower your level of chronic mental pain. It's nothing to be ashamed of.
So along that string of lowering, so say we do all collectively succeed at some point in time to reduce our overall pain. What do you see as the utopia there's the whole argument around a lot of great art and civilization and just economies and GDP rely on that feeling of stress and anxiety pushing us forward to produce and consume.
Yes, for a long time, people have been. Aldous Huxley talked about the brave new world. Everyone is taking soma, it's called, and they're all chill and they're all doing nothing. And so people are afraid that if we all lost all of our pain, we're just going to sit around and do nothing. And I'm not sure what would happen if we all lost our pain, but I know there's no danger of that happening anytime soon. So not really worried about that. But I would say that if a lot of people had a lot less pain, then it would be a much more peaceful world. People wouldn't anger as easily. People wouldn't get tense so easily. People would be more productive. People would be more creative. We'd get along better. We would treat our planet better. So I'm all for a massive reduction in pain. And I'm not afraid that we might lose all pain. Now, in terms of art, yes, the art that's based most on suffering, it resonates with other people who are suffering. And so we might, if there's no one suffering very much, then we might lose art based on suffering, but then there'll be art based on happiness, and it'll resonate with people who are happy, and I think it'll be fine. And will we be as productive? I don't know. I mean, I would trade off some happiness for less gadgets.
Along those lines, what do you think will happen to competition? There's a lot of competition even in the corporate world, like a space at Google. Mm-hmm. Or in performance review time, lots of stress. There's competition in the world out there.
Well, one thing I would emphasize is that while if you lost some of your pain, you might lose some of your urge towards competition, but you're also going to be better equipped to compete. You're going to have more energy. You're going to be less distracted. You're going to be more creative. Pain is helping. There is, it's been called the inverted U curve, the Yerkes-Dodson law, where a certain amount of pain might be optimal for certain tasks, a certain amount of motivation is optimal for certain tasks. But if you go past that level, if your motivation or pain level is too high, it's actually working against you. And I suspect that most people are a little past the optimal point in terms of their level of pain and motivation. And so if they relaxed, they would actually come back to a more optimal point. I'm less worried about them sliding down past the optimal point and being too relaxed.
I see one brave soul with a question.
Yes.
Thinking back to the example you gave at the very beginning, that video, the woman that didn't really experience pain. So we all walk around with physical aches and pains and the mental, so it would be great to reduce some of that mental. But as her example showed, it's sometimes non-adaptive. There was reasons she didn't take her hand off from the oven. Have you done any research for people, helping people identify for the mental pain, which parts might be useful or good to accept or channel a little bit versus the kind to just reduce altogether?
Well, like I said, for different types of tasks, there does seem to be an optimal level of motivation or arousal. So for very simple tasks, it's okay to be highly motivated or to be even under a certain pressure or stress because it's a very habitual task and you could do it faster and faster without thinking very much. But for creative tasks, for very complicated problem-solving tasks, too much motivation is definitely going to interfere with that. So, I mean, obviously the lack of reaction to physical pain has real-world consequences. But being chill about mental pain, I don't think we know anybody who's completely indifferent to mental pain. But then there's always the question of the gurus out there, and they tend to just teach and hide out in caves and things. So I don't know if that's what's going to happen to us. But again, as I said, you could always meditate until you start feeling just too relaxed and too chill, and then you can stop. You can always stop and get stressed out again. It's not hard.
My question is, in a city like New York City, that's, I don't think people realize this, but sometimes subconsciously on your way to work, you might deal with these short form or, spurts of trauma. Just run into the train, anxiety. What are some practical ways to really deal with, trauma or pain points outside of meditation, because we see a shift in e-meditation or, separate yourself. But in a city like New York that's never sleeping, what are practical things? Not so much theory, but practical technical things we could do.
What I would say is, yes, meditation is the long-term solution, and we shouldn't wait till we need it. That's not the time to meditate is when, I feel I need to meditate right now. No, it's better it's like, you don't just brush your teeth when you feel like your mouth is horrible. You just do it regularly. And so with meditation, it's best to just get into a regular routine, do it when you're as relaxed as possible, well rested, not rushed. But it's not good for the immediate stress. But there are like mini meditation things that people can do. And breathing exercises actually are getting very popular now. There's some literature that shows that if you breathe at the rate of 6 times per minute, this is sort of optimal for putting your heart and breathing rate in coherence, and it activates your parasympathetic nervous system, which is opposing your sympathetic nervous system, which is the fight or flight response. That's what's going off all the time in the subway and stuff, is your fight or flight sympathetic nervous system reaction. And you want to stimulate your parasympathetic to counteract it. And so there are little breathing exercises and little mini meditation exercises. I tell you, what's available now is terrific because there's so many apps. I mean, you could just click on your Calm app on your phone, or your 10% Happier, or your Headspace. There's so many things like that. And then there's so many good videos online about little breathing exercises and little mini meditations. So there's just so much there, I couldn't even summarize all of it.
Thank you so much for taking the time to do this with us. A lot of it, this has been eye-opening. Part of that for me was just thinking about how stress builds in infancy, and you touched upon distractions and electronic distractions being there today, and parents using that a lot. You see this in restaurants and infants with those kids, and so intuitively they know what to do with phones and things. I have a year and a half old niece who's like so good at using a phone. So given that, but you said that, once these distractions are taken away, they also amplify that feeling of sadness later on. So given that, where do you see the state of happiness for the world, given the exposure of social media and technology so early in life? And so where's that going? And what would you like companies like Google to do better to educate children, consumers, parents on, things that, so that your whole take on that whole thing?
Yeah, well, we've all been reading in the news that the Silicon Valley parents are keeping technology away from their kids. They know all the deliberate addiction paradigms that they're building into these products. They are built to maximize addiction. And we know from basic behavioral rules, things we found out in animals, how to reinforce people at just the right intervals, to maximally addict them. Jonathan Haidt wrote a book about our parenting and is talking about, talks about snowplow parents and all that about, he doesn't think people should have cell phones until they're like 10 years old or so. I think one downside is that if they are using these devices to distract themselves very early, they're not going to learn any internal methods to distract themselves, so they become entirely dependent on these devices. It used to be we had good old inner speech all the time and running our own little soap operas, and then we found out that this is easier to use the phone. So this requires that much more parenting. Parenting, I feel I didn't have kids, I confess, and parenting is so hard. I've seen other people, what they go through, and the fact is, kids are in such pain that they require so much attention and so much love and affection and everything so constantly, that how can parents who, often both parents are working, there's daycare, there's, back in the very old days, we would live with all our extended family and all the relatives, and everybody would participate in childcare, and cousins and older siblings, and everybody would be around to help. And now there's so much isolation. It doesn't surprise me that stress is getting worse and worse in modern societies. There are some societies where things are a little more chill. Like also in the audience, Pema Sherpa here, comes from Nepal, and was telling me how when she grew up, there was a really nice attitude towards children and a calmness that she still has with her. So I think it's a tough problem, and we need more parenting skills, and it's very hard to do.
What can tech companies do better in the short term in terms of education?
Well, I think Google is on the forefront of doing great stuff. You have meditation rooms, you have yoga teachers, you have me giving this talk, which I think is just shows the commitment. Because I haven't even finished writing the book yet. And so Google's really willing to take a chance on having me talk about this topic because they know just how important it is. And so there's a lot of things companies can do in terms of rest breaks and just, it's counterproductive to push people too hard. It's, again, that inverted U curve, which is if you put too much pressure on your employees, it backfires and they become more ill, less productive. And so having therapists on staff, having counseling, all the stuff that you have, I think more and more companies are doing that. And that's a very helpful trend.
Thanks so much for getting out here, for being mindful with the whole hour, for giving Barry such a warm